When did you buy it?
Late 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did the housing market crash?
2008. Timing is everything. It was called an intensive, and it was 19 days in a cabin by yourself and this whole thing. And I thought, I need to do that. Something happens when you have your first kid. It's like you start going, oh my gosh, I'm a dad. How do I do that? And then you just feel totally incapable. Many times I still had to mow the lawn and stuff, so I'd be mowing the lawn. Here's this burned house right next to me. And God would just stop me and he'd say, it's gonna be better than it was before. And he would stop me and I would just start weeping.
He just writes one simple comment and he says, hey, in the midst of all your theological debate, can we just recognize that you guys are all a bunch of porn addicts? Is your theology helping you? And it was like, mic drop.
The one thing my dad did do with me, so we went to the dump all the time. And I don't know why he had so much stuff he had to take the dump, but he wasn't really a hoarder.
Another dump run. It's the third time this week, Dad. Jeez. I had to recognize what had control over me. And so I didn't have sex for 17 months. And he was like, and then it lost control over me. And he was like, I'm truly free now. That's freedom, when you don't have things that have control over you.
Because that's what allows you to live fully alive and free, because he's putting it inside of you.
I like that plug you just did there, alive and free. Nice. Did I put you up to that?
No, you didn't.
It was good timing. Cool. Well, this is fun. So I have substituted my lovely wife with my lovely friend. And I would say, in certain aspects, spiritual father, too. I know you've never taken on that title or anything like that, but that's
as long as you don't say mentor, I'm okay.
My cult leader. So for you guys listening or watching on YouTube, I have Steve Petermeier here, and Steve has become somebody in my life that has helped me to soften in a lot of places in my heart, which has been awesome. And he does a lot of coaching around the world. I met him through some mutual friends here on the island, because you were doing work with several organizations, basically almost as like as a coach, and like doing a form of like discipleship, and even leading people into encounters with God in companies, like in organizations here. And you've done a bunch of stuff around the world with Jamie Winship, with leading people into understanding their identities and getting freedom through some of that. Maybe you can explain how you tell people what you do normally on a day-to-day basis.
Well, basically, I just tell them about me. I tell stories. Yeah. Because I think that's the best way to explain things, is with stories, and I've got a lot of them because I'm old, so it's a great way to start and share about my life. And in the course of that, there are things that you can encourage people with to help them. I laugh about the mentor thing, but I just believe that it's about sharing life together, not somebody passing on their words of wisdom, but doing life together. And as you do life together, you share one another, and you share what you've learned as you gain from the other person, regardless of ages and all that stuff. So even when I worked at the companies, in fact, I just stopped by today and saw some of the guys that I had worked with, and it was just so fun to see the connection that happens when you're involved in people's lives in a significant way, and digging into those places, because we all have them, where we've been hurt and deal with stuff that causes us to become something that isn't what we were made for. So that's what I get to do, and I do that everywhere. I mean, I'm talking with somebody in a coffee shop, and they'll start saying things. All you have to do is listen to people. And it comes out. They say it. They say what they believe about themselves that isn't true. And so I just listen for it, and I just start asking questions.
Yeah.
And well, that's crazy that you would say that, and why do you think you say that? And, it goes into a conversation.
That's so awesome. How old are you, by the way?
72 at the end of the month.
72, jeez. Almost 72. So here's where I kind of want to intro you for real to this audience, and why I think it will be really beneficial for you guys to listen or watch with this episode, is because when I have done the life that I have, being around great leaders, a lot of counselors, a lot of coaches, we've done the work that we've done. We've been around a lot of leaders in pretty big Christian movements. And I think anytime you come across somebody that has some significant aspects of Jesus' character, it's like it leaves an imprint. And with a lot of 70-year-olds or older men that I've experienced, I know you feel young to me. You don't even, it's funny to say that, but I get a sense of more skepticism or more hopelessness, or a little bit, they're, just not as excited about life. And I think being around you, there's been so many moments where I've seen you have a tender heart. You've stayed really vulnerable and admitted weakness in the moments where you feel inadequate, or there's feelings that have come up for you, and you've been honest about those things. You feel so excited and hopeful, when you talk about your relationship with God. And there are just so many childlike things that you've cultivated in your life that is so, I think it's so influential in just the way that you live, that I think it's when I'm thinking about my life, I'm man, at 70, I would love to end up that hope-filled and joyful and not holding on to expectations. William Paul Young, he goes by Paul, but his author name is William Paul Young. He's I don't know why they still do that. It's weird. He's just call me Paul. But he, in talking to him, he's one of those people that you can just tell nothing has control over him. And that is so refreshing. And I think about my life, there are lots of things that have control over me. And that's stuff that I'm navigating on a daily basis, learning to let go and surrender. And I'm not there yet, but I love seeing people like you that are showing that it's possible. And I'd like to figure it out sooner, but who knows?
Well, that's where the age comes in.
Right.
It does, because it's all about suffering and death.
What do you feel led you to that place? Are there any moments or key moments in your life where you're I can look back at that moment or this moment where those were either shattering experiences, or what do you feel led to the experience of life you're having now?
Well, all of your story is a combination of all those things. So, yeah, it goes way back to issues that I had with my dad. And I went through some abuse as a kid in junior high, and all those that, and then a huge one was when I was married and we had our first kid. And something happens when you have your first kid. It's you start going, oh my gosh, I'm a dad. How do I do that? And then you just feel totally incapable, right? And I had grown up with this idea that what you do is you have to prove yourself by becoming the best at what you do. And so my goal was to be the best husband and father there was. Well, I was totally failing at it because that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And so I went through some therapy that was very significant for me, and that was huge in my life, letting go of just get pushed into it because it wasn't working. And ultimately, that's the only time we change things, is when it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the suffering, right? We suffer because we keep doing the same thing and it's not working, and then it gets bad enough, then you just have to do something.
Yeah.
And so I went, heard about this, it was called an intensive, and it was 19 days in a cabin by yourself and this whole thing. And I thought, I need to do that. And so I did, and it changed everything. And I remember coming back from it because you go through your life, all the stuff. You feel everything you felt through your life for 19 days with this psychologist. And at the end of it, you either, I don't know what you do, but I had to come to a place of realizing that I liked me. And I actually got to a place where I liked me, because you're alone by yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know if you don't make it through that, but, and so I came back from that. It was huge. It was one of those life-changing things. And I remember my wife saying to me when I was telling her about it and saying, it's you're giving up things, and it really feel like I've changed as a person from the core. And she goes, well, does that mean you're not going to do things for me, like bring home flowers and candy and treat me with those kinds of things? And I told her truthfully, I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I don't know, really. I'm learning again who I am. It was like feeling like you're starting over.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know. But I can tell you this. If I do it, it'll be from my heart. And that was the difference, because she had seen me trying to be a good husband.
Like out of duty, out of moral obligation.
Because I have to prove it. I'm going to become the best husband ever, kind of thing, which, you totally fail at when that's your goal.
Yeah.
And so that changed everything, and changed ministry. It changed my marriage. Changed. That was a huge.
What about business?
Huge one. Business was again when I purchased a real estate franchise, late 2007, and it was a lot of money, and I took out a big loan to do it and all that, and it was not working.
When did you buy it?
Late 2007.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did the housing market crash?
2008. Timing is everything. And I thought I knew what I was doing and that I'm going to kill it, right? I mean, I was just in that place. I was,
oh, gosh.
How old was I at the time? Probably late 30s, and you're building your thing, and we're going to take over the world.
Dang.
And I have these great relationships. I'd been in real estate for, at that point, I don't know, 15 years or something. I had great relationship with other realtors. They're all going to want to come to my company. And then they didn't. And it was very humbling. And it was finally, I made it through for about a year and a half, borrowed money from family, friends, anybody.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And it was probably late 2009 or early 2010. I went to the regional director of this franchise system and said, hey, I got to do something. And he goes, well, there's not a lot of people looking to buy a real estate company at this point. It hadn't turned around yet. And so, but then somebody came along, and so I sold 80% of it. I kept 20%. I sold 80% of it for pennies on the dollar.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what a lot of those companies do, is they look for blood in the streets. Yeah. That's when they buy.
And I was the blood.
Yeah, you're bleeding.
I remember going home and saying to my wife what was going on, and I said, okay, so this is what I did. And she goes, well, why would you do that? And it's because, 20% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And that's where it was going.
Wow.
And so, those humbling times of just desperate, I've got to do something different, and God gets your attention. And when he gets your attention, he's ready to do stuff, right? But we're so set in what we're doing, right? It's comfortable, it's safe, comfortable, familiar, and we stay in that until it isn't anymore, and then it's like, okay, God. So that was in business a huge one for me.
Dang.
And then it was pretty amazing what happened, because these guys came in and it just turned around, and part of it was. Obviously the market was changing at that point, and it just took off. We had this real estate company, we had 30 people in it trying to make this go, and they grew it to 260.
Dang.
And
you still have 20%?
I still had 20%.
Nice.
And we lived on that 20%.
Yeah.
Until the interest rates went up, and everything changed, 4 years ago, and all of a sudden it stopped again, and I come home and it stopped, like it was like just stopped, right? So every quarter they put money into my account, and then it, boom, nothing.
Really?
Zero. It didn't slowly go down, it was just zero.
So what kind of real estate? Is it like?
Residential real estate.
Okay.
And I, again, went home to my wife and said, well, things are changing.
The faucet turned off.
Yep. And she goes, well, I thought that was our retirement. I said, well, it was. Till it wasn't. And
Dang.
But it was such a beautiful time. And because God used it in such amazing ways. And to show himself to be faithful.
Yeah.
And probably 5 years before that is when our house had burned down. We had our house burned down. We lost everything. Same thing happened there. And so it's so interesting because my wife, now we talk about our lives, and you look back and it's those events, those difficult things that now are the greatest blessings in our life. House burning down, almost losing the business, going through my own personal stuff. Those things were blessings.
Yeah.
And that's how he works, right? He
feel
redeems them all.
I feel like though too, it does require somewhat of a posture of humility in those moments, like letting it humble you at the same time. Because I've seen guys double down when they lost everything, and they double down on all their biggest insecure protectors. And I can think of a guy right now, actually, in particular, but just thinking about how I see you are, everything is threatened in your life, but you've gone so deep into this false, narrative or this mask that you're wearing to try and combat it. And I feel like there is something about the people that go, I do surrender. And it's like the earlier you can do that, it feels like the less you'll experience devastation, like the suffering. I feel like suffering is one of those things that's almost, we control how much suffering we go through. We might experience persecution or trials or hard things, but we don't have to suffer through those things. That I feel like is more influenced probably by our own mindsets and belief systems and our own lack of connection with God or connection with God.
Yeah, very much so. And you do have a choice in those when it happens.
Yeah.
When our house burned down, it was an amazing story of we're going to my wife's dad's memorial service.
Yeah.
I'm taking the family in the car. My wife was already there getting ready for it. And I get the call in the car with the kids that the house was on fire. And, it was very traumatic.
Sure.
Obviously. But at the same time, we were in a city 5 hours away, and we had to stay there for 2 more days for this memorial service, and all the family was there and everything. And here we know our house is burned down and it's sitting there, and we're at this thing. And
jeez.
And so we had to my wife said, look, I want to honor my dad. I don't want this to get in the way. And I said, I totally agree. And so we did, but it was the first night we had to get through the memorial service, and then my wife and I just fell into each other's arms and just wept when we finally got back to our room.
Oh, man. And
the next day, God said, it was so clear to me. He said, I want you to have a celebration. What? And he said, I want you to have a celebration, and I want you to call it a celebration of memories. And so it was a week and a half later that we got word out. We're meeting in the backyard of the burnt down house, and we're going to talk about God's faithfulness. And we had 150 people show up. Our house was kind of the center of the community for Young Life, working with high school kids and all that. So a lot of people were there a lot.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. And many times I still had to mow the lawn and stuff, so I'd be mowing the lawn. Here's this burned house right next to me. And God would just stop me and he'd say, it's going to be better than it was before. And he would stop me and I would just start weeping. But there was always that sense of, it's one of my favorite lines, God is always in the unexpected. And when we have something unexpected happen, if we can stop and go, wait a minute, where is God in this? I'm going to look for God in this because he will be there. But we immediately go to negative. Something bad happens. You walk outside your door to leave the house and you have a flat tire.
Yeah.
And the first thing immediately is, well, there goes the day. Everything's ruined. I can't get this done and I can't make these things happen. And it's all a waste.
Yeah.
Rather than when those things happen, stopping and going, okay, God, I'm going to find you in this. Because that's what changes it. That's where he's allowed to move when we let go of having to control it all and just have our hands open.
Have you always believed that God is good and for you?
For the most part, yes.
Okay.
Early in my life, I remember thinking, I don't want to screw up because God's going to send a lightning bolt and kill me.
Yeah.
As a kid, and probably maybe even up into my 20s, I think I felt like if I screw up, that's going to happen. And it was this sense of I have to be good for God.
Yeah.
And I think through making lots of mistakes and seeing him and experiencing him, that's changed. And now, it's totally different.
I feel like there's kind of this process we go through, taking the face of our Father off of God's face too.
Yeah.
I think about my dad, and I love him. I've had him on this podcast too, and we've had really in-depth conversations about hard moments, in our lives, and we've talked about things and stuff. But I just think about like, okay, and my son's gonna have to process through all of this in regards to me and the way that I have failed.
Every kid will.
To not be God, right? That moment Dad had way too big of a reaction, and I learned, I can't blah, 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 blah. It's like, I'm going to have those moments. I know it. I know that they probably even already happened. But there is this thing going like, oh, God doesn't withdraw, when I'm in pain or going through problems, or he doesn't go, yeah, you screwed up. You should probably get that fixed, and then you can come close to me again. And that was kind of my thought, is like, oh yeah, a good dad does create space so you can learn consequences. It was kind of like woven in there, and it's because there's something in us that thinks when we're in sin, when we're making mistakes or we're failing in any way, love coming into that will almost validate or perpetuate that experience. I think that's what religion thinks.
Yeah.
If I don't sow enough fear and consequence and punishment into moments where you have improper behaviors or thoughts, then you'll continue to do them. And so I'm gonna add in a little bit of fear and control always to make sure we keep you in line. And I immediately think about like the churches where it's like they just have to add in, like they're like, grace, Jesus, God shows up this way. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, but the tithe, here are all the consequences if you don't, bring the tithe. And it's like, why? Because they're a scared, struggling church. And they think if I don't do this, then people won't give, our church will fall apart. But we have this in all of our lives.
Yeah. And it's our culture.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. We have to protect ourselves. We have to build up something, and then we have to protect it.
Yeah.
And it's goes totally against the gospel.
Yeah.
But that's what we think, because that's what we live in. So you struggle with something, and we immediately come back and go, well, God will take me back because he forgives me, but I have to be good for a while first.
Yeah.
Then I can go talk to him, and then he can be there. And I just love Genesis 3, and that's not how God does it. I mean, there's this beautiful example of failure, as we would see it, right? I mean, the fall. And what was God's response? Well, there's going to be some consequences. And then what does he do? He provides for them. He gives them loincloths. And then he protects them by not letting them go back into the garden again, where it could be forever in this same state, right? To protect that from happening. So he provides and protects in the worst moment of humanity. So in our little things, if you see that and can understand it up here, that's a step, then you got to experience it.
Yeah.
And you have to experience sensing that God loves you in the midst of that stuff. That's the other part. And most people don't get beyond just the thoughts of it. You can study it, you can have all that information, but if it doesn't go deep in an emotional way in you, it's not fully effective.
So let's say someone like watching or listening is like, yeah, well, I don't see God as good, and I never have. How would you walk a person through getting in touch with some of that?
Interesting. Let me share this little story first.
Go for it.
I was coaching with a guy, and I could not get him to see anything. And I'm taking him down every road I can think of that in his the right brain, imagination, seeing things. And he said, I can't. I said, so if I ask you to see a house, do you see a house in your mind? And he goes, no, I don't see anything.
Jeez.
And it was 30 minutes of trying to go in everywhere I could think.
Very emotionally suppressed.
Yeah. And so finally I go, God, I don't know what to do here. And then the question came to my mind. And I said to him, when did you start believing you can't see anything? And he stopped from this older guy. He was probably 78.
Jeez.
And he goes, and you could see lights coming on in his head. And he goes, when I was young, I struggled with pornography. And the only way I could keep that from continuing to be in my mind is to say, I am not going to see anything in my mind. He chose to shut that off. All imagination, all thoughts of seeing things in his mind. And so it was this beautiful moment of him realizing what had happened. He said, but it served me so well. I said, well, it could be different. He said, but it served me. And he said, well, it served you, but it kept you from fully living into what God made you to be.
Yes.
Because it happens in the right brain when we choose to go into imagination. And there's exercises to do that. And that's huge because we live in left brain. We live in information, reasoning, systems. That's where we live.
Yeah.
And God meets us in the imagination.
Yeah.
Yes, we learn from scriptures, and the Holy Spirit, brings them alive to us and speaks to us through them. But there's another part, because if all we have is words on a page and there's no images to go with those words, they don't have the same impact. They're just letters stuck together.
Well, like when we've walked people through things, I'm like, hey, think of a moment that you experienced love. It's like, really, okay, I think I can, it's like, if I tell you, what does it feel like to be loved? It's hard to come up with like, what does that feel like?
Yeah.
But if I say, who's a person that loved you where you felt so seen and known in a moment in your life? Oh, this teacher, or this, and you're like, okay, cool. So it required a face for you to be able to associate the feeling or the experience. And that's usually like when I've seen a lot of people in like inner healing stuff, they're like, okay, so just see Jesus there. And I know it has benefits, but I am like, okay, so I'm going to think of that random picture of Jesus from like this book or that movie I saw. He's like 1960s, like Jesus, a little bit of, some chops going on there.
Yeah.
And
I know that one.
Yeah, right. And you're like, it still has benefit, but that's not actually the closest representation of Jesus I've experienced in my life. Him as the hands and feet through a person that was loved to me in a moment is actually the most accurate representation of Jesus I've experienced. And sometimes having those people come in and sit next to me and love me has been really impactful. Yeah. And there's obviously a lot of different things that God can do inside of your imagination to bring redemption and healing. But it's very interesting that we almost need something in our society and day to day to get us out of our left brain and unlock our right brain to be able to access some of these things. Okay, so real quick, just wanted to take a quick second to say that if you're tired of feeling stuck in sadness, disconnect, or feeling powerless to relationship triggers.
Maybe you just feel swirly internally and you don't fully feel powerful to work through your emotions, and you really want to be more connected to yourself and to God. We really encourage you to click the link below the description.
Yeah, so we have like a full hub of all the courses we've ever created for emotional health, spiritual health. The best thing you could ever do if you have a vision for your life of who you want to be is to get help or mentorship mentorship from people that are ahead of you in some specific area. And that's in order to become the person that the loved ones in your life deserve.
In this hub called the Alive and Free Collective, we have a monthly coaching call with us, a monthly teaching and Q&A with trusted experts we love, and we have a community of believers on an emotional health journey. And like we said, all the emotional health courses we've offered, and a vault of over 50 trainings from the top emotional health leaders giving their best guidance.
It's only $47 a month, and you can learn all about that if you click the link below. And if you want to learn how to be a safe leader and coach others and start a life coaching business, you can click the link below as well in the description to learn about our program, Coach Launch. Okay, back to everything that's important.
Yes. And it's all about thinking of things differently.
Yeah.
And, that's what Jesus was all about. He brought a new paradigm everywhere he went. It was never the same. It was always new. And we look at life as it's the same every day. It's like, well, nothing's the same every day. And yet we live like it is. We do the same things every day. We do it the same way. We get in these patterns because I think it's because it makes life easier. So I want it to be easy. So I know what I'm going to do tomorrow, and then I'll throw in a few other things.
Yeah.
When walking with God is the adventure of not knowing.
Yeah.
And so you've got to think of it in new ways. So first you got to get people to be willing to think about it in new ways. And if they're stuck in a certain way, that usually it's religious people, pastors that have the hardest time, because you're telling them that what they've done all these years isn't it, that there's more, and they tend to be pretty stayed on what that looks like. So if you can get people to think differently about things, like what is a new way? Have you ever thought about a new way to think about things? Because that's what God is always taking us to. He's always taking us to new things. And Jesus did it when he was alive. I mean, the Jews missed him because he didn't fit the paradigm. And the disciples couldn't figure out what was going on because they had a paradigm of what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And he blew that one. And that's what he's doing with us all the time. And so if you can allow that to happen, then you can go in new places with him.
Yeah.
See him in different ways, encounter him in different ways. You imagine there has to be new ways to encounter him all the time. God's too vast for us to know it all. And so we get to experience more and more by thinking in new ways.
That makes sense. That's awesome.
So that's mostly what I'm trying to do with people. I'm going to speak at a missionary conference next weekend. And I was thinking, so what do you do there? And I mean, these are people that it's professional, right? I mean, they're the professional people that preach sort of out there all over the world. But I think it comes back to the same thing. It comes back to their own intimacy with God and then being willing to see things in new ways.
Yeah.
And see that in new ways.
I had a buddy that had this community for men getting free from porn back in the day. A lot of leaders, pastors, and people
I know.
Oh yeah, ministry leaders, pastors in this group to get free from porn, and I commend them for it. I commend them for being a part of stuff like that. And it's sad to think about all the others that won't even face themselves. Yep. Right. And what was so funny though, there was this moment and they had this Facebook group community or something as a part of this group. And one day in one of the threads, this guy said something and then it just sparked this whole theological debate in the comments. So all these pastors are starting to debate this thing back and forth, and they're starting to get pretty intense in their theological debate about this thing and all that stuff. And all of a sudden the leader of this group, my friend, comes in and he starts looking through it and he's catching up. He's like, geez, look at all this that's going on there. And he just writes one simple comment and he says, hey, in the midst of all your theological debate, can we just recognize that you guys are all a bunch of porn addicts? Is your theology helping you? And it was mic drop. And it kind of stopped. It humbled all of them in a moment. And it's a pretty cool response. Wow. And it's one of the things, like Damon Thompson is a pastor in Alabama, and one of the things he says is like, we need to let go of our doctrinal certitude, where we get so into thinking what we think is right, instead of, I just want to know what is right. Yeah. And I think sometimes we get into that about God, where we're like, I'm so convinced in what I know about him that we don't get to actually learn who he is, and let the concept of who he is and his nature develop further and be more aware of his goodness. And I feel like in my life, the more I get to know him, the more I realize how much better he is than I ever thought. And that's the thing that makes me want to draw closer. And as I draw closer, I just naturally want to be more like him. Yeah. And I don't have to try and muster up that willpower.
So good, so good. And it all, I think a huge part of it, of all that happening, and why that was so significant, that guy, the mic drop moment, is because he just spoke truth. Yeah. And sort of just went right through all the crap. Yeah. Of all the theological stuff. Yes, the religion and all the trying to prove themselves by having the right answer, all that stuff. Yep. To just go to, I'm just going to truth tell. And that's what happens in us when we get to the place where we can feel comfortable enough with who God is and his nature to be truthful with him. That's huge. Yeah. Because most of us don't. I was on a fishing trip a couple of weeks ago, and there was a gentleman on it, a pastor, and I had shared some vulnerable stuff, and he came to me later, not when the group was meeting, came to me later and said, I don't know Jesus like that, and I want to know him like that. Well, that's all God needs is somebody like that to speak truth. You bet God's right there. And he's just waiting for us to be truthful with him. Yeah. Because he had all these beliefs, and we've met a number of times since then, but he has all these beliefs about God that kept him at a distance. It was safer there. And we just need to be truthful. God, I don't think you really care. And I don't think you're here. And you're too busy for me, or whatever the things are. But when it comes to God, we have a hard time just telling the truth. Yeah. It's a huge part of the process of growth and change and thinking in new ways. It has to be knowing where you are now before he can take you to the next place, and being truthful about what that is.
Man, that's so good. That story, I'd love to hear that story about the man in the college professor. Is that a story you can share?
Yeah, I think I can.
Okay. I would love to hear that story, because I think that was a cool story.
So I won't give too many details. Sure. But I got a call from his wife, originally contacted me. She heard through somebody else and got my number and said, my husband, he needs to meet with somebody and do something because it's intolerable living with him. And he...
what every man loves would long to hear behind his back.
He was a professor at a Christian college and had been fired for some statements he made online. And he was angry and bitter, and he had all his people in his town that were all with him. And so it kept him there so that he felt like he's a victim, and all the other people around him were just, pumping that into him. And they'd get together and they'd talk about how terrible it was and all that stuff. And he called me. We started meeting and started, going to truth. And what ended up happening was he discovered that most of this came from things that happened with his dad and what his dad had told him, and that he basically wasn't enough. And as a result of that, he had to prove everywhere he went that he was the guy. Yeah. And so we all know people like that, have that kind of edge to them, right? Sure. It's like they're trying to prove something all the time, and they're can be kind of bullyish and kind of, that kind of attitude.
I've been that person many times. I know exactly what you're talking about.
When I shared earlier about the real estate company, I was trying to get people to come in with me. I met with a guy once, and he said to me, "You are the most arrogant person I've known."
To you?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah. That was part of that process of being humbled by God when I took over that real estate, when I started that company. Anyway.
Jeez.
So this guy is wanting to figure it out, and he was desperate, and that's huge. And he started telling the truth, and it changed everything. And so interesting, because when we got into it, when we got to his identity and asked God about what his identity was, and God told him, and it was a powerful moment for him, because his identity is encourager. Well, that's been the furthest thing from what this guy has been. But it hasn't been because it isn't who he is. It's because he believed he had to prove something to people all the time. And so beautiful story of what happened. And then he called me one time and we talked about, I said to him, I think I need to come out there and meet your people. And he goes, I would love that. And we ended up, this is just a few weeks ago, and I took another guy with me, and we went and spent 3 days with his community. And this community is saying, we've watched this guy's life change in front of us, and we want to know what happened. And so we spent 3 days, including his pastors and community and people from the college came out to hear what had happened to him. And I just thought of, the stories when Jesus does signs and wonders and the whole town comes out. That was the kind of thing that happened. It was amazing. And he would get up and just say, all I know is this is where I was, and now I'm here. And so they asked me to share how we got there, and it was beautiful.
So cool. I have a question about this. Like, you've obviously met with a lot of men. You are a man. You have experienced a lot of men in young life. Like, there's just a lot of interactions you've had with men. Like, what would you say are the biggest struggles you've seen that men have?
A particular age group, or just?
I think men, like men.
Men, I would say it is one thing, and that's an inability to live in the unknown. We have a hard time with it because we feel this pressure, this responsibility to take care of your wife, your kids, your family, your business, and we have to figure it out. We have to have the plan. We got to know, and that's not the life God calls us to. And over the years, meeting with people who've made millions of dollars and lost it all, numbers of times. And they talk about how difficult that was. And the reason it's so difficult is because we want to know. We just want to know.
Yeah.
We want to know how it's all going to work, what it's going to look like, and we want to plan it out, and then it's supposed to turn out the way we think it's going to go, and it never does.
No.
And you can have and especially when it comes to the issue of money. Money is giant because that's the thermometer.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we can have all these plans and we can do all these things and feel all these responsibilities, but we check by the thermometer is how much money we have.
Yeah.
And how comfortable we feel with all that, and what kind of house we live in, what kind of car we drive, all that stuff.
For sure.
What people think of us, and that's the big one. And once you can learn to live in the unknown, everything changes.
Yeah.
It's freedom. It's like life begins in a whole different way when you're not fearful of what's going to happen. And the only way through that is back to pain and suffering. The only way through it. The only way
being
through
real about it, feeling it, or
getting through the money issue. As long as you have a safety net of $100,000, $20,000, $5,000, whatever it is, as long as you've got that safety net, you can't learn to really trust God in the unknown because you're not really trusting him. You know that scripture where it talks about you can't serve God and mammon.
Yeah.
So I heard a definition of mammon being whatever you trust in. So you can't trust in God when you're trusting in something else. And with money, as long as you have a safety net, you're trusting in that. Even if you think, oh, no, I'm not. Well, yeah, you are, because you're feeling comfortable because of that safety net. So the only way through it is to lose the safety net. And that's scary. Nobody wants to do that. Who wants to choose to, well, I'm just going to give it away and get rid of it so that I can learn to trust God? That would be the way to do it. The problem is we don't choose that. We don't ever choose that. It has to happen to us.
Yeah. Yes.
And it will, because God cares so much about us learning freedom and learning to walk in the unknown, that he will take you there because he cares for you.
Yeah. I mean,
and I hope that for everyone.
That's something like I was telling you before this, we're talking about downsizing, and like, the thought of decreasing a lot of expenses per month sounds just like, gosh, that would be so nice to not have this need to produce in different times. Cause I feel that. I'd say it's one of my biggest struggles that I have is my need to produce.
It's a pressure that's always there.
Yeah.
Until it isn't. And when it isn't, I'll tell you, it's awesome.
Well, I was just telling Sammy yesterday, I miss about myself how much light was in my eyes when I wasn't doing all this business stuff. You know, that I love influence. I love motivation. I love speaking. I love, putting together. I love learning and growing, and then sharing the things I've learned. It's like, that's my favorite stuff. You know, discipleship is a place I've come alive in. There's just like all these different things. But in the businesses I've started, and I've done some of that, you can also justify these things all day too, because you're like, well, there's people I'm leading, and there's lots of things. But what does it come with? And I think I'd say for me, what businesses come with is like a need to try and control the numbers, because you got to make the numbers work. You got to make the balance sheets work. You got to make the cash flow work. When it doesn't, you're failing. When it is, things are good. And that's one of the hardest things to carry in marketing. You can live under this illusion that you can control people's behaviors. If I tweak this thing, the conversion goes up 2%. Those are people, not a percentage. Those are people that are showing up more. If I use this language, that resonates with people more, percentage goes up. Oh, this thing broke, percentage goes down. And it's like you're literally playing with all these levers and going like, okay, here, all these things in place. And you create this like 25 stage algorithm of how you think you can control people. And it's not fun to believe that. It's not fun to think that. You're not the person in the room, starry-eyed, full of wonder, going like, I don't know. Like, I don't need to know. You're the person that thinks you have all the answers. And that person is usually the most sad person in a room. They're the least connected to themselves. They're the least enjoyable person in the room. They might help you.
And you look at case studies in the scriptures. Where do you see that?
The Pharisees.
Yeah, it's when you see, Jesus said it, unless you become like a child, you'll never enter the kingdom. Well, what's a child look like? Their wonder, I don't know what's happening next. And they don't really care, right? I think of the wonder of just being with my dad. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to be with him. The one thing my dad did do with me is we went to the dump all the time. And I don't know why he had so much stuff he had to take the dump, but he wasn't really a hoarder.
Another dump run. It's the third time this week, Dad. Jeez.
That was something you did with me. And so he would take me to the dump. And I remember, I loved those times. And I still remember what it smelled like. And the seagulls, and this is in Tacoma, Washington, and the seagulls were around and all that. And the sound of them and the smell and all that. It's a good thing for me because I have great memories of that. And all I wanted was to be with him. I didn't care where we were going. I didn't care what we were doing. I just wanted to be with him. That's childlike wonder.
Yeah.
And so if you can put that into, as a man with your family, leading them, if you can bring wonder in not needing to know and letting it unfold, because that's all the great stories of the Bible.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And we read them and we go, wow, that's great. Oh, it'd be great to live like that. But nobody wants to live like that, right? You don't want to be Noah building the boat, right? And getting all the ridicule from your family and your friends. Or there's so many.
Yeah.
We don't want to be that. We don't want to have to go through that. And yet we love the stories, right? They're the adventure.
They're inspiring.
Yes.
There's something in us that wishes we had what it took.
Yeah.
And I think to illustrate it, it's like you need the Holy Spirit too, to fully be able to. Like, what I think is so fascinating about the disciples is before they received the Holy Spirit, Jesus said, all of you will forsake me, but my Father will not. And it was like every single one of them did. They left him. They left him at his time of his greatest suffering because they were scared of dying. And that was their thing. Even like Thomas at one point said, like Thomas the doubter at one point said, let's go there and let's die with him. You know, and even Peter said, I will never, you know, it's like all these things, but then saw this willpower. And then on the other side of it, they renounce him, they leave, they depart, they're scared, they're creating space. But then when they wait up in the room, they receive power from the Holy Spirit. They encounter Jesus in the resurrection. They experience like power being given to them. We see each and every one of them almost that gives their life. You know, Peter didn't even want to be, crucified right side up because he didn't believe he was worthy of it. So he got crucified upside down. I mean,
because they didn't fear death at that point.
At that point, yeah.
And
done.
that's what it takes.
Yes.
Right? Not fearing death. Because ultimately it's death, right? Because the stories we go through in our mind, well, if this fails, then I'm not going to have any money, and then I'm going to lose my house, and then we're not going to be able to eat.
Yep.
And then we'll be on the street, and then we're going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, it all ends up, essentially inside us, there's this fear of death.
Yeah.
And all those things just lead us to that place. And eventually it's just, I'm going to die.
Yeah. And that's so interesting, you know, and we
but
try to prolong it.
You take that off the table.
Yeah.
And then you're back to life.
Well, I was just watching Patrick Bet-David yesterday in one of his interviews, and this guy asked him how he found his faith because he's a Christian, and he sold a company for $500 million. He is probably worth over $1 billion. He just bought a property yesterday for $25 million cash. Like, you know, it's just crazy, stupid money. But this guy's a believer, and he's doing a lot in like influence and politics and all that stuff. But he's like very smart. He built this channel called Valuetainment where he creates educational content for entrepreneurs and people that want to grow in business and things like that. Very smart. And one of the things that he says in this interview, though, is he said, I reached this rock bottom. And he's like, I researched and everything. And I was like, who has the greatest families? I chose Christianity because I knew that no matter what book I was going to read out of all these different books, you know, I had to put all of my faith in it. And so I was like, who has the greatest experience of fruit in their lives? And I looked at like true Christians. And he's like, so I just immersed myself in it, and it paid me back dividends. And he's like, the next thing that happened in my life, though, he said, I had to recognize what had control over me. And so I didn't have sex for 17 months. And he was like, and then it lost control over me. And he was like, I'm truly free now. He's like, that's freedom when there's something, when you don't have things that have control over you. Yeah. And that was when I saw that, I was like, that is in the heart of every man. Every man wants to be free from control. Control of our spouse, right? A lot of guys feel that, you know, control from their parents, the voice of mom or dad still in their head saying like, this is right. This is what you should do. And like, weighing every decision. What would mom, like, would they be happy with me about that? Could be something else. It could be like, am I significant? They're like, their need for significance is controlling them. Their need for validation, like nothing I ever say or do is ever like approved of. It's like your approval. All these things, tons of different things have these control over us. And that's when you were saying like, the guy that said it served me to not enter in my imagination. We make these transactional exchanges where these protectors rescue us from our insignificance or from our fear of lack, like with money and things like that. And they become friends. But those friends require a lot from us. They require our soul. And Jesus is saying there's actually something that if you let go of it and you find me, you'll actually find all of that salvation that all those things gave you in small forms. You'll find like this whole salvation in me, and it will require everything from you, but you'll live full, like 100% full. Yeah. And it's the scariest exchange on the other side because it is unknown. I've never known that. Yeah. So I'm scared to do it, even though I've seen it. I've seen other people that have had that freedom I want.
Yeah, and when I'm coaching people, it always comes down to that. And so we'll take time to go through what has it cost you? What does it cost you in your life to live with that? And then I'll go back to it. If they're struggling with it, well, I don't think I can give it up. It's too familiar. It's too comfortable. I can't let go. And I go, well, how's it working for you? Because it hasn't worked. Not truly, because they're not living the way they truly want to live. And I know for me in my life, when I was, because my big lie was that I'm not enough, and so I had to prove that I was enough, and so I had to have people involved in my lives that validated me. And I was in a young life. It was the perfect place for me, right? Because these kids are thinking I'm really great, and well, it was terrible for my wife and family because I had to be there for these. We had a high school boy live with us our first year of marriage because I couldn't say no to him, and he needed help, and his mom was an alcoholic, and it was a bad situation. But I had to do that because I was controlled by it. And it hurt everyone around me. And that's one of the ways when you're walking in that false self, so to speak, because it hurts everybody.
There is in ministry, I think a lot of people don't realize how strong of a driver it is, the desire to be a good boy to God or the desire to be a good boy to people. And it's like the two things that I see a lot that infiltrate church leadership, church influence, all that stuff. Even like in the whole hierarchy of roles that are available within a church congregation. It's like, I'm on the prayer line, or I'm in the pastoral care, or I'm the lead pastor, or I'm the worship leader. It's like these different things that fill us, and it's like we are unwilling to almost be fully ourselves. So like I'll see guys like, you're so good at the smile, you're so good at the winning others over, you're so good at the witty banter, you're so good at even talking about all the stories that you've seen. Like I was so good at taking risks on the streets. I saw a lot of crazy stories where God showed up, miracles, and I actually in moments had really deep care and love for people on the streets. But the main motivation that drove at like a way further back place was I need to be the greatest ministry person that ever lived. It's like, it was like, cool, if I'm doing this, I'm going all in. Well, I need to know what's the standard and how can I be the best? Because if I'm the best, I'll never be rejected. And that was my belief. If I'm the best at something, I can't be rejected. And if I am, well, there's a nice person to catch me on the other side or another. Yeah. And it's interesting because that really kept me from being able to, what it led to was extreme burnout. It led to my heart turning off. Like, so when you said, I'm now going to love you, like to your wife, when you said, I'm now going to love you from my heart. So if I do get you flowers, you'll know it's from my heart. That's what I lost. It was like in that process, I lost just being moved to do something. It's almost like I got so good at knowing the loving thing to do from here that I couldn't do it from here. So I was thinking, I just was so good. Like I was reading people and going like, oh, I could encourage them. And that would be a loving thing to do. That's here.
Yeah.
That's not a moved with compassion. And if we see Jesus in all the scripture, and Jesus moved with compassion, healed the sick person, and Jesus moved with compassion, did this, and Jesus moved with compassion. And I'm like, man, to be compassion led, how powerful would that be in the church, like the body of Christ, if the whole world saw a people moved by compassion and not by these, evangelical ideals or principles we have to hold to out of duty and obligation.
Yeah.
That sounds like religion.
Well, and that's how the church grew like it did, because they saw a difference. They saw the church caring for one another, and being there for each other, and it wasn't this performance.
Right.
It came from the heart as they cared for people, and that's what we've lost a lot of that.
Yeah.
But Jesus said it, or I think it was in Revelations, but it says, I have this against you, you've lost your first love. That's it. I mean, it ultimately comes down to, do you have encounters with the living God? Because that's what allows you to live fully, alive and free, because he's putting it inside of you.
I like that plug you just did there, alive and free. Nice. Did I put you up to that?
No, you didn't.
It was good timing. That's awesome. Man, this is such a fun conversation. Like, just getting to hear the stories and everything too. I know it's inspiring. I think it's scary, the concept of laying down everything, but I think it's far less scary when you come home to yourself and you come home to God in you. 'Cause when I've connected with myself and I've connected with God in that place, I don't feel like I need anything else. It's like, I don't need anything else right now. Why do I need something else? And most of the things that stress us out are self-imposed. Pretty much all the things that stress us out are self-imposed. So I have to recognize, what gift are those things? They're not.
Yeah. Yeah. And all God wants is to be with us.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he promises. Doesn't promise a lot, but he'll always be with us.
Yeah, it's good.
And what does that look like? What does that look like for us? Because for most of us, it's thinking, well, I have my quiet time and I pray and then I go through my day. And well, where's Jesus in that day? And what does it look like for him to be with you? Just as I was driving over here, I have this thing I do with God, and I just put my hand out as I'm driving along. And I just imagine Jesus putting his hand in mine. And we're doing this together. And that's those kinds of ways to allow God to be in us all the time and to see him is so important.
Yeah.
And we don't live like that. We don't have that intimacy to it. And that's what he wants with us, to walk, in the cool of the day in the garden.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted. That's our example of what this is all supposed to be, walking with him in the garden.
Yeah.
So if we can come back to that and what that looks like in our days, and sharing with him, and being truthful with him and letting him speak truth to you and listen for the still small voice. That's the intimacy that leads you along the way, because all we can do in this process of becoming transformed is receive. Yeah. So it's not like you can speed it up or I'm going to make it happen by whatever. All we can do is receive. So it's just putting yourself in a posture to receive from him so that I can receive what he has for me today and the places he's going to take me to that are going to stretch me, that are going to encourage me, that are all of those things.
Yeah.
And that takes time.
Yeah. That's good. Well, I appreciate this. So do you have a website, by the way? I don't even know if we ever talked about that. Do you have a website? You don't?
No.
How can people get in touch with you?
I have an email.
You have an email?
Yeah.
I'll put that. You want me to put that in there?
Sure.
Okay, I'll throw it in the description. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you hopping on here, Steve.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. It's always fun.
So fun. For those of you that, enjoyed this time too, obviously leave a rating and a review. It really helps us. And if you like the video on YouTube, go ahead and click the thumbs up. And if you want more videos like this, you guys can obviously subscribe to the channel. And then as well, I know that Sammy and I obviously have our women's program. It's, it's our Come Alive Collective, or it's our Alive and Free Collective for women. But I am releasing a program for men. And in this first group, I am actually inviting in men to be a part of it for free. I want to just see if this is something that's helpful and needed by men, and it's something I feel called to. I want to open it up for you guys. So I think that starts on the 24th, which is a Thursday. So between now and the 24th of October, you can sign up for that if you're a man, or if you have a man that would like to sign up for that for free. I'm going to be doing like coaching and helping men in that group. And so you guys can look for the details in the description as well. But thank you guys for your time. Love y'all. And see you next time.